So today we're going to be shading our imaginary architecture project by creating an imaginary light source. And what you're going to need today is one single colored pencil to shade this project with. We're going to be using what's called a monochromatic color scheme, meaning there is just a one color scheme using 4 different values. You'll also need a pencil sharpener and a pencil for this project today. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is decide where you want the light to be coming from in your project. You can pick a light source that works for you, but I think I'm going to choose my light source to be coming from the top right corner. So I'm going to draw an arrow on a sticky note, that way I can remove it later to remind me where the light's coming from. Now, one very important thing is that light is going to affect all parts of this building in the same way because light rays are always parallel. They never radiate or rotate, so the way it affects this box is going to be the same way that it's going to affect every box in this whole picture. So that's going to be really important, is that everything is consistent. So the first step that we want to do is shade all of the planes that would be getting the most amount of light, our lightest value. We'll call this value 1. So every top-facing plane is my lightest value because it's getting the most light because it's facing that light source the most directly. And this even includes the top planes on the insides of buildings too, like the floor here you can see in there. It's facing upward, so it's also considered a top plane. This is going to be very important that every top plane is the same value in order to keep it consistent. Next, I have to decide what is going to get the next most amount of light, and we're going to call this value 2, based on my imaginary light source. So I think the side planes, the right sides, are all going to get the next most amount of light. So I'm going to shade them just a slightly darker value than the top planes, because they're getting almost as much light, but just not quite. So just a nice subtle shift, slightly darker. We're going to call this our value 2. So for every single right-facing wall, I'm going to go through and shade it this nice value 2. Now, one piece of advice I want to give you about shading is make sure you take your time with this and get nice, smooth, careful shading. You don't want jagged, rough marks. You want this to be really clean in its craftsmanship and consistent in that value, because craftsmanship is always really important. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is decide, based on this light source, which plane is going to get the next most amount of light. And I think it would be the left walls, and then the bottoms will get the least amount of light out of those 4 planes. So now I'm going to shade my value 3 on any of the left-facing walls. And a great way to help you figure out what direction a wall is facing is to model it on your hand. The back of my hand is facing away from that light source, so therefore it would naturally get darker. So I'm going to go through and shade all of that with what I'm calling my value 3. One step darker. I want to make sure that it's nice and clean shading right up next to the edges to give me a nice contrast between values 1, 2, and 3. And just a reminder, you also want to remember to shade any of the interior walls the same value with its matching exterior wall. Any plane going in that same direction needs to be shaded the same value. Now, the last step that we're going to do is add in that value 4. So in my example, the plane that gets the least amount of light would be my bottom planes. So now I'm going to go through and shade those with the absolute full pencil pressure to get that darkest value that my colored pencil will go. Now, as you're working, if you have any questions about which planes should be your values 1, 2, 3, or 4, or about a specific situation, you can just let me know and I'll be happy to help you. But once you get finished, you can remove, or if you wrote it in pencil on your paper, erase your arrows for your light source. And then now you have a nice finished, complete shading project with your 2-point imagined architecture. Now, one of the great things about this project is it really forces you to think about the direction that each plane is facing, and it helps me assess whether or not you have a good understanding of that concept when it comes to linear perspective. So make sure that you keep all of your planes consistent in the value that you chose for it. So for example, all of the right planes should be consistently the same value, all of the left, all of the top, all of the bottom planes. You should have a nice distinct 1, 2, 3, and 4 value steps. And that helps make this project look really three-dimensional because you've created that believable light source.